How many times have we all faced a certain dilemma where we know something we love so dearly has to be let go? Haram relationships, addictions, excessive entertainment. I think those kinds of sacrifice have so much weight because usually these things keep us somewhat stable and pretty happy most of the time. And so the only reason you would ever have to give up something you love so much would be because there is something bigger that you're trying to achieve. That makes these distractions look pale in comparison. Let's assume that in this case it would be the act of submission to God's will. And in my opinion, these sincere sacrifices that we make for that reason, that's when you press the right buttons. That's when loyalty is proved and our Islam becomes absolutely refined and manifested in its truest form. Allah narrates the story of Ibrahim a.s. having the dream of slaughtering his child, Ismail. And that's one of the greatest tests, as we all know. And a prophet's dream must come true. And so Ibrahim having that dream means he actually needs to carry this act out. This story was mentioned in Surah As-Saffat, where it tackles a few important themes. One of them being the right way we view the angels and the jinn in relation to God's nature. It also brought the certainty of the Day of Judgment and the false beliefs of idolatry. And finally, the surah narrated the accounts of the prophets where these beliefs and ideas were put to the test. The belief in one God above all and the submission expected to take place to His will above all else. That's what Surah As-Saffat pretty much covers. And that's where you find the narrative of Ibrahim a.s. having the command to slaughter his own child in a dream. This story acts as a ultimate expression of all these heavy concepts portrayed in Surah As-Saffat. That's what it means when we say we believe in Allah. And this is what it means when we claim to follow Him and trust His wisdom. And so Ibrahim and Ismail took the spotlight to give us a representation of this. Before I share verses that relate to the story, there is something we all need to know here. Surah As-Saffat here carries a very particular weight and rhythm. It consists of very emotional statements in very short verses. And its verses rarely exceed even 10 words. Yet, look at how Allah emphasizes the whole episode of Ibrahim and Ismail. In the first verse, when the story begins, the reaction, surrender, and the acceptance of Ibrahim and Ismail to do the act is around a length of 26 words. فَلَمَّا بَلَغَ مَعَهُ السَّعْيَ قَالَ يَا بُنَيَّ إِنِّي أَرَى فِي الْمَنَامِ أَنِّي أَذْبَحُكَ فانظر ماذا ترى قال يا أبتي افعل ما تؤمر ستجدني إن شاء الله من الصابرين. Thereafter, when the boy Ismail reached an age in which he could work with him, he, Ibrahim, said, "O my son, I have seen in a dream that I am slaughtering you. So consider, what is your opinion?" He said, "O my dear father, do what you have been ordered to do. You will find me, inshallah, if Allah wills, one of those who endure patiently." Now Allah went out of His way to actually elaborate here more than any other verse in this whole surah. And Surah As-Saffat has a total of 182 verses, by the way. So in the second verse, when Ibrahim is about to slaughter Ismail, it's just 4 words. Just 4 words. Allah placed the heaviest focus on how they reacted to His test, while the actual performance was mentioned really briefly. فَلَمَّا أَسْلَمَ وَتَلَّهُ لِلْجَبِينِ. So it was a great episode when both of them submitted themselves to Allah's will and laid him on his forehead to slaughter him. This is such a significant moment in our tradition where Ibrahim was about to slaughter his own son while his son being completely patient with the command. All of this, being a beautiful demonstration of their devotion to the truth. Yet it was only 4 words. The whole event, Allah just chose 4 words to describe it. And given this simple, noticeable difference in emphasis, we see that Allah doesn't want to see our suffering and sacrifice as much as He wants to see our determination, feeling of trust, and surrender are towards Him. That's where the focus was. This is very hard to do because we are always looking at consequences. But the lesson here is to shift that focus. Don't focus on the consequences of your surrender, focus on the beauty of your surrender. That is everything, and that is where the core of our submission lies. Are we okay with what we're asked to do? Are we sincere enough? Are we willing to carry this out just for Him? Sometimes when these internal feelings come out to the surface and are proved, our tests end, and what we were afraid of losing in the first place returns. In this case, as we probably heard from before, Ismail actually returned back to his father, and Allah replaced his sacrifice with something much better. In essence, your surrender will seem trivial in what openings and grants that Allah may bring to you after. But you might say that sometimes we do get inspired to carry a certain sacrifice or a command, but there will always be that fear that it's just way too overwhelming, or that the thought that some harm may come to your way. So when Musa alayhi salam's staff was thrown and turned into a snake, right after that, he was ordered to take a hold of that very snake with his own hands. And that was his command. In Surah Taha, Allah tells him, قَالَ خُذْهَا وَلَا تَخَفْ سَنُعِيدُهَا سِيرَتَهَا الْأُولَى. He said, take it and do not fear anything. We will soon bring it back to its first condition, being the staff. Now that must have been scary. It must have been horrific to go and grab a hold of a snake. But despite that, Allah told him to seize it first, and then He told him not to feel fear. Allah put priority to the action over the emotion. And here we get the key to submission and how to truly move forward. That's the right psychology. We are emotional, we are anxious, hasty creatures, but when there are things to do, a prophetic role model to follow, commands to obey, our insecurity, our fears, our thoughts take second precedence, second place. And that's because there must be a trust that the emotion will be overcome once the physical steps are taken first. Allah called Musa alayhi salam to trust this concept here. He called him to focus on the task in order for the emotion to reside. Think about it. If it was not fear and then seize the snake, this narrative would have never been over. Because if Musa alayhi salam kept staring at this moving snake, waiting to feel calm and the fear to go away, it would only get more overwhelming, right? So in these moments where we freeze up in obeying commands, whether to drop a sin or to put on a hijab or to go out on your way to alleviate someone's pain, you must have no doubt that to make a sacrifice for Allah, that whatever emotional barrier you think you have will be taken care of by Him. The fear of your loss, consequential pain, and sacrifices will always be compensated. This is the promise here. We can't hesitate because we can't afford to decline what would await us on the other side. And of course, as always, I just want to remind you, this is not a tafsir. This is a reflection on the established meanings of the verses amongst our scholars. I'm not your neighborhood scholar or your teacher. I'm just some Muslim kid.